The story is about a guy, it mostly follows his daughter, but he can read, and of course he can read. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with 15 books to get to know me. So this is by no means an original idea. I saw Tori from A Novel Life do this, and I think she did it based on a thread on Threads of basically the same thing of just like a bunch of books to get to know me. She did 10. I'm thinking the thread was also 10. You guys know me. I cannot be limited to 10, so I have 15 here to tell you about. So this is a great video if you've been here for a while, or if you're new, just to kind of get an idea of like who I am as a person and a reader. I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about a bunch of different books, why I picked them, why I think they represent me, that kind of stuff. So by all means, have fun, play along in the comments with books that you think would represent you, but let's just dive right in, shall we? So the first book, I think some of these are going to be very obvious if you know anything about me. The first one I think is a very good example of this because it is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I am a huge Jane Austen fan, and I read Pride and Prejudice. First, I read it for school when I was a senior in high school. It was like the summer before, and it was required reading for the summer. It was like they gave us a list of books to read, and you could just read one of them, and I chose this one, and I just had like heard the name all over the place. I kind of wanted to know what it was about. I didn't really get invested in it until about halfway through, and then I couldn't stop reading, and I watched every adaptation I could find. I like deep dove into her work, figured out some stuff, and this kind of really kick-started that love of, well, first off, Jane Austen and all things Jane Austen, but also like Regency England. I devoured anything, and I still do devour anything set in that time period, and this really kickstarted that love. It also kind of kickstarted a love for classics, which has kind of dipped in the last like 3 or 4 years, I'd say, but I was really, really into classics and wanted to read all the classics, and I have a classic shelf. This kickstarted a lot of things, but I like fell in love with this and the world it created and the story it created. It was the very first probably hate to love story kind of written. I doubt it's the first one I read, but it's the one that kind of like kickstarted my love for that trope. So there's a lot of things about Jane Austen. It just kind of like is my life, and I love everything about it and anything that has to do with Jane Austen. I literally have, that's my Jane Austen shelf. So I have all the books as well as like things that are based on it, and I just love all things like that. I even have like a whole section, I'm looking at the shelves on that wall, that is like nonfiction that is related to Jane Austen. Her life fascinates me. She fascinates me. Her take on literature, or her take on society, fascinates me. So this one I feel like is very obvious if you know anything about me. The next one on this list is actually Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, and this one kind of steps in for all of her books. This was the very first book by her that I'd read, and then it proceeded to take me into the world of ACOTAR, which I have devoured, and I'm just now starting the world of Throne of Glass, and just anything that she writes I am very interested in. But this one was like the first kind of urban fantasy that I had experienced. It was the first book that like, I had liked fantasy. This wasn't like my first fantasy by any stretch of imagination, but this is what made me a Sarah J. Maas fan, and I definitely fall in that kind of like stereotypical vibe, which I am 100% okay with. So this one is more just like, this is a favorite of mine. I love her work specifically. Anything that's kind of revolves around Sarah J. Maas, I think I'm fascinated with. I think her books are very interesting because they kind of transcend a little bit. Like, I know people who I've followed on YouTube for a long time who are not book people. Like, their channels don't revolve around reading, and they have discovered Sarah J. Maas, and through her other books like Fourth Wing and things like that, like just some of the more fantastical romance books. And then there are people who are like, a lot of people would assume Sarah J. Maas books are for women, whereas like I know a lot of guys who have read it and are obsessed with it as well. But she is definitely an author that like I fell in love with very quickly. I think I read this book 2 years ago, I want to say. So I'm a relatively newer fan, but like I've gotten my friends to read, like my best friend Lauren, she read it because another friend and I were just talking about it nonstop, and so now she's understands the ACOTAR world. And like I said, I have another friend who I can read and talk to, and like I have a friend from work that I have gotten to read this book, or me and her sister have kind of got her to read this book. And so like it's just something that's fun, and like people who may not normally enjoy books by her would devour it. So like this one just kind of like is a stand-in for all things her, but also like romantic fantasy as a whole. That one's more just I like her a lot and not necessarily about me. All right, the next one is one that I read when I was younger, and you can tell because this book is the one that I read and it's falling apart, and that is Inkart, and this is by Cornelia Funk, I think. I really don't know how to pronounce her name. I think she's German. This one is the first kind of portal fantasy, I think, that I really devoured. I mean, like I knew of things like the Narnia books, but I didn't really care until this one, and I think this one was the first one that kind of like shaped a little bit of my book-loving heart. This one basically is this guy, I mean, it's in his daughter's kind of perspective. He has the ability to, when he's reading things from the books that he's reading or the text that he's reading, come out into this world, and something from this world goes into the books. And so he was reading a book series one night with his wife and his daughter when she was an infant, and the characters from the book came out and his wife went in. And so it's the start of a trilogy where like things happen. But this one really just kind of like took me heart and soul. This one is definitely one that I would consider like shaped me as a reader, and I discovered books about books, honestly, through this. I loved this. This was definitely a really fun story that kind of, like I said, shaped a little bit of my childhood. I mean, this is like thick and it's for middle grade, but you know, like that time period where I was trying to figure out what I was interested in reading wise, and at the time I would only really read things like Harry Potter. So to read something like this was just a lot of fun, and I loved it. So that one definitely is a like childhood favorite. The next one is Amanda Wakes Up, and this one is by Alison Camerota. I read this one a while ago. This one actually was gifted to me by a family member for my birthday, and this one is about a woman in media, and it's written by someone who's actually a journalist. And I, if you didn't know, used to work in news. I worked in news for a couple of years right after graduating college. It's actually right about the time I started this channel, and I really enjoyed my time. It was a small, like, local town station, so it wasn't anything like big like this was, but this was something that I was reading it, and it was about like being impartial, and like, you know, she works for a big kind of like media company. It's more like one of those bigger, broader mainstream, if you will, not necessarily like a small news organization. And it was like her kind of figuring out how to be the journalist she wanted to be, but also it's about women in journalism. And so there's just a lot about this that I personally resonated with. And it's been quite a while since I've read this book, so it probably is due a reread, but I just remember reading this and having moments of like, oh my gosh, yeah, I know exactly what she's going through. But then there's also moments of like, you would get like irrationally angry for her. And so I read this when I was working in news, so it was definitely like read at the right time because I was actively going through some of the stuff that she was talking about. So this one kind of represents more of a section of my life, but because of it, I've been able to read other books that are set with people or around the media in some way. Like I know that Rachel and Solomon has a couple of books that the main characters are set in either news or radio, and I resonated with a lot of those books because of their experience with media. Now granted, those are romances and totally different. This one is primarily focused on her being in media, but I just really enjoyed it. And this one represents a time in my life when I worked in news, and I will think very highly of that always. The next one is actually a poetry collection, and that is Yesterday I Was the Moon by Noor Unar. I know this author now has another book that I need to invest in, but this is a poetry collection, and I read this near the beginning of my YouTube career, if you will, and I don't know if you can tell by the amount of tabs in this book, I resonated with a lot of things in here. It's been a while, but like it says here, I'll read this, that this book contains poetry about art, heart, people, home, you, courage, self-love, strength, culture, acceptance, and survival in no particular order. And so like this has like really short poems, it has illustrations, then you do have like longer poems that are like the full page. I mean, there's just some stuff in here that like I don't know how to explain it unless you've read it, but like this is a book that is me in a nutshell. I love poetry, but I don't read it a lot of the time because it's very, in my opinion, when you read a poetry collection, it's very repetitive, which is fine, but it's repetitive in a short way, which is also why I don't do a lot of short story anthologies either. I kind of get bored after a while. This one, super short, I devoured, and if you've read it, you know, that's kind of a weird one to put in this video, but like if you've read this or read anything by this author, I feel like you will understand the connection for me. All right, the next one's another one that's kind of like a weird, I put this because I loved it situation, and that is The Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, which is the first in this series. I love this. There's also spin-off series as well, which I'm including, even though I haven't actually read those yet. Anyway, this one is one that I went in expecting absolutely nothing and came out of loving. So this one I think is on this list for a couple of reasons, besides the fact that I loved it. One, this one not specifically, but the rest of the series stems to go from YA to new adult, and it stems to lean in a more smutty fashion, but that was the kind of smut that I enjoy reading. So like this represents my level of spice and where I'm comfortable. So that was one thing. I love the connection between our characters, but also this was like the first morally gray character that I really connected with. The main character of Wrath in this book, I'm telling you, I loved him. It's a little bit more on this list because of Wrath than the smut, but like they're both part of the reason it's on this list. I just really liked it. Okay, I liked him, and I know that like morally gray characters, specifically main male leads, are very popular, but like I hadn't found one that I felt was 100% morally gray. I felt like there were characters who like presented as morally gray, and then the more you got to know them, the more they were actually like sweethearts and not necessarily bad people. He, I think, is that perfect example of like in between. He does some terrible things and you go, I don't know about that, and he does some good things and you're like, okay, it might be worth it. And so it's that like it's exactly what you expect. So I think it's on this list for him, honestly. Like he is everything. I love him. Okay, the next one is The No-Show by Beth O'Leary, which is a book that I just read like a couple of years ago and absolutely devoured. It was my first Beth O'Leary book. The reason this is on this list is for a couple of reasons. One is I went into it, it was about what I thought it was about was not what it was actually about, and so it really shocked me. There's quite a few plot twists and reveals in this book, and I didn't see a lot of them coming. You might be better than me. You might have seen some of them coming, but I didn't see any of them coming. I'm also really bad at seeing things coming. But I loved it because not only is it a romance, because it does have its romantic elements, it is so much more than that. This one specifically is about grief and how people react to it. This is one that like I used to work with a woman who was really, you know, hadn't really read a whole lot, and so I told her to read this. She picked it up and then became obsessed with reading since then. So like that is like one of those books that like I feel very like pat on the back. I think this transcends genre, so if you're not a big romance person, that doesn't matter. I think you would still enjoy this. So there's just a lot about it that I think works for people, but I think it represents me because of the whole like it had me second guessing the whole time. The way it was written was very interesting. It has like a romance, but there's more than just the romance in the story, and I really enjoy books that have like, yes, romantic elements as the main point of the story, but they pepper in a lot of like real life stuff as well. So this was probably the first book that I think did it really, really well, and then also was just a huge surprise. So that was fun. This was a little bit totally different than anything else on this list, and that is The Shack by William Paul Young. This is actually a Christian lit book, which I read for a class in college. I don't think I would have picked this one up without it. I'd seen it places. I didn't know what to think about it. The reason it's on this list is because I don't talk about it a lot on this channel, but faith is really important to me, and so this represents a lot of my feelings. about certain things, and I had never seen it written down before. And then I read this book, and it really kind of like honed in on a few things that I believed and presented those things in a written way that I had not seen before. Really, like, it just kind of like represents my faith and journey and that kind of stuff. So if you were interested in that part of me, that is a good representation of how I feel about things. Right, the next one is To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. This is the first in her Regency Vow series. There are 5. This is my favorite one, and it's on this list because of the way it's written. It's a Regency romance. You guys know I love me some Regency romances because of Pride and Prejudice, probably. But this one has a very humorous banter style when it comes to the chemistry between our main 2 characters, and I ate that up like it was nothing. I mean, there are many books that I have read since that have a humorous writing style, and I always compare them to this book because this was like the first book that I read where I was like, oh my gosh, I love the way this is written. I love the banter between our characters. They're like jokey, but also like pointing fun at each other. And I love banter between characters, and this was written very well. So if you really like the Regency style vibe, this one also has to do with like our 2 main characters out pranking each other a little bit, and so that was fun to read in a Regency setting. But again, the conversations between the 2 of them, spectacular, and I just really appreciate a good banter, funny situation, and this does it so well. The next one kind of represents how I feel about historical romance, specifically Scottish and Highland romance. If you know, you know. Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. I picked this one up totally on a whim because one of my best friends, who at the time we had just met, put this on a TBR, and I said, that sounds really interesting. I would like to read it. And we ended up buddy reading it together, and now we've buddy read so many things, and we talk all the time, and like, I got a really good friendship out of this. But this solidified how much I love that Scottish Highlander vibe when it comes to historical romances. This really solidified why I now have 2 full shelves of mass market paperbacks that are historical romances. I just really enjoyed it, but also this is the first time I saw a different take because our main female lead in this book is deaf, and I feel like when you have historical romances, it's very rare to have a disability or to have someone who is not white. And so like this, while yes, the characters in here are white, it showed a disability in a historical setting that I think was a very interesting way to do it. I just really enjoyed this. And again, it solidified that love of historical romance. It solidified the friendships I've gotten through it. It solidified the Scottish Highland vibe. I think this is perfect. I think if anyone is interested in a Scottish Highland story, but you don't want like some of the super brutal Scottish Highland situations, this is a good one. It has its moments. Like near the end, there's definitely a climactic moment that's a little bit on the more brutal side, but it doesn't have a lot of the historical brutalness that you might see in some other things. It's a little, I guess, sugar-coated is the best way to describe it, but I just really liked it, you know, and I will never stop raving about it, and it's due a reread. I love it. The next one, I genuinely forgot about this book, and then I saw it, and I was like, right, duh, I have to talk about that, and that is the Illuminate Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This represents the entire series. I do have the entire series, but I have not always been a fan of sci-fi. There are some sci-fi that work, and there are some sci-fi that don't, and so this definitely, like, I picked it up from the library because I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I've heard it's very interesting, so I want to give it a shot. And this kind of like reignited my love for certain elements in the sci-fi genre, which was great. The biggest reason it's on here is because it is written in a mass mixed media format. You have chats in here. You have emails in here. You have even like program situations in here. You've got like a countdown clock. You've got someone looking at video, like surveillance video, and writing down what they see in the surveillance video. So like this is as mixed media as you can possibly get. And I love books that are written and presented in things like this, epistolary novels where it's written in letters or emails or situations like that. Just something that's written in not your average novel format, even if, yes, it's a novel, but like there are elements, like I've read a thriller where in between the chapters there are like sections of a podcast, and so like that's fun. I just like it when like the author takes a story and presents it in a very different way, and I think this is a very good explanation of what I mean with that, because this is a thick book. You can get through it relatively quickly. It's very like dense in its sci-fi-ness, but it's also like you understand what's going on. Like I went into this afraid of how I was going to connect with the characters because I didn't know how to do that in a mixed media format like this, but you do. You connect very heavily. And also, if you are a like audiobook person, highly recommend these in audiobook because like they're presented full cast, sound effects, the whole shebang. And if you can listen and read at the same time, that is the best experience in my opinion. But like, this is the start of a trilogy. This is the best one in my opinion. I really, really enjoyed this one, and it just explains how I enjoy the way a book can be written differently. Like, it just shows it perfectly. This is what I mean when I say like mixed media formatted books. The next one is Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. This one is here just because, well, A, it's a graphic novel and it's beautiful, and I will never stop raving about how stunning the illustrations and the art in here is. It also represents my love for graphic novels as well, but it also represents my love of Greek mythology. I love me some Greek mythology. I have like sections on my shelves that are dedicated to Greek mythology. If a book is remotely presented as a retelling of something with Greek mythology, I am immediately 1000% more interested in it. And this is the story of Persephone and Hades in a very kind of modern telling. This is, I have the first 4 of these. There are, I think, at least 6 out, maybe more. I can't remember how many are out. I stopped buying them. I need to buy them again. Also, you can read them for free on the app. I talk about it all the time, but there's this app called Webtoons, and totally free. You can read it up to date. That's where the author is like putting things out. This represents my love of graphic novels as well as Greek mythology, and just stunningly beautiful illustrations with so much color. And the way that she just presents, I'm trying to find like a good example. The way she presents these characters, like everyone's a different color, and I just really enjoy it. None of these are giving me a good example, but like how everyone is presented in different colors. I don't know. Stunning. Also, she doesn't shy away from the fact that like Greek myths, if you've read the original, very toxic, very traumatic situations, especially for the humans in those stories. So like the fact that this author takes all of that and doesn't shy away and kind of hide that and romanticize some of these relationships. Beautiful. I love it. The next one is actually The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory, because I love books set around Tudor England. That's another time period that I very much enjoy. And so I have a lot of Philippa Gregory books, although I've gotten rid of quite a few that I've read. But there's only a handful that I've kept because I love them. This is one that I watched the movie a while ago, and I didn't expect anything from the book, and then it became my favorite, probably, of all of the books that I've read by Philippa Gregory at this point. But she has an entire series that is like the Plantagenet Tudor timeline. So the Plantagenets became Tudors, but like that time period, I'm all about. I love me some Tudor time period. Anne Boleyn, fascinating person to read about, in my opinion. Her daughter Elizabeth, so like Tudor into Elizabethan England. I love it. So this represents my love of that time period when it comes to books. Again, another buzzword for me is Tudor England. So if I discover a book is set in that time period or with those characters, immediately 1000% more interested in that story. I just love them. I just love it. The next one represents my love of all things fae, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now, I know some people very iffy about her writing. Some people don't particularly enjoy her writing. I read the Spiderwick Chronicles, which she co-wrote when I was younger, and enjoyed them. I think I remember thinking very highly of them. It's been quite a while since I've read them, but I remember thinking very highly of them. But this was the first one that I read that was her solo book, pretty early on in my booktube journey. I devoured it, and this kind of look at fae and the fairy world, and I think it was so fun. I want to reread the series because I think now that I've read quite a few things since then, and I kind of have a better idea of fae as a whole, I will enjoy this story even more, pick up on things I didn't pick up on the first time. And then there's also a spin-off series, which is a duology, and I do own those because I have a problem. But like, all things fae, if fae are involved, I'm going to be a little bit more interested in the story. Another buzzword for me is fae, fairies, elves. I love it. So yes, this represents my appreciation for that kind of mythical creature and books that showcase that. Also, the series was just really cool, and it was probably my first, I would consider that romantasy on like the lighter end of romantasy. So this was definitely my first kind of step into that side of fantasy romance. And the last book I'm going to talk about is kind of, it represents just like my obsession with the reimagination of fairy tales, I think, and that is The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani. This is the first book. It's a series of 6, and then there are 2 more books that he has written that are like prequels, if you will. I own the first one. I need to get the second one and actually read those 2, but this one is exactly what it sounds like. It's a school. There's one side's good, one side's evil. These 2 friends, who you can see here on the cover, are taken to the school, and they both assume they know which school they're going to, and they get sent to the opposite one. So Sophie goes to the school for evil, and Agatha goes to the school for good. And they're like, something's not right here. And then it's their exploration of good versus bad, the twisting of fairy tales, the reimagining of some things like that. There's just a lot about this that I thought was very fascinating, and I really enjoyed my time. It's supposed to be middle grade. I would say it's definitely older middle grade, and it's not for everyone. My husband read this and didn't understand why I'm obsessed with it, which is totally fine. We have definitely different tastes when it comes to that, but I just really liked how this author took the stereotypical story, good versus evil, all those fairy tales that we have grown up knowing, and completely swapped it on its head. And then also, like, a lot of the people in this book are the offspring of villains or heroes that we have come to know. And so I just enjoyed seeing the little like almost like Easter eggs of past stories and fairy tales that like we've grown up with. I just thought it was really well done. I just think it's a good series, okay? And I really enjoyed it, and I could see myself rereading that at some point in the future, maybe. It took me a while to get through them because it's 6 books, and this is the thinnest book, and they get bigger every time. But I loved them. I really enjoyed diving into those. And that's it. That is a look at 15 books that I think represent me as a person and a reader. I hope you enjoyed. Like I mentioned, I hope you played along in the comments, but let me know if there's some books that you think represent you as a reader. Share those in the comments. I'd like to get to know you guys as well a little bit more. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and also obviously check out Tori's video, since that was the original idea of this that I definitely stole, but it was interesting and I wanted to do it. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe it down below if you'll be part of this awesome and growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun books links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!